Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride, and you join us for a special edition, as these Friday shows have been for the last few weeks, where we're going to talk about something. We're going to do a deep dive into something, and tonight, in honour of Mental Health Awareness Week, it's going to be talking about mental health and the issues that people are facing during the lockdown. Now, to talk about this with me, joined by two rather excellent guests. Firstly, by Helena Rafai from Southside Self-Isolation Support, and by Tony Giuliano, who's the Policy and Public Affairs Manager for the Mental Health Foundation in Scotland. So, Helena, how are you this evening?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad. And Tony, how are things with you?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me on.
Excellent. Well, before we get into that, we will just go through our coronavirus update and a few headlines first. So, as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there had been a total of 97,607 coronavirus tests concluded. Of those, 82,638 were confirmed negative, 14,969 were positive. Last night, there were 874 people in hospital with suspected or confirmed COVID-19. 38 were in intensive care, with another 12 suspected. That marks an increase of 113 confirmed new cases since yesterday, but again, a drop in the numbers in hospital and intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 2,245. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 36,393 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 351. This number refers to deaths in all settings now, not just in those in hospital. And in today's headlines, travellers arriving in the UK from the 8th of June will have to tell the authorities where they'll be staying and face spot checks to ensure they quarantine themselves for 14 days, the Home Secretary Priti Patel has said. All new arrivals, including UK citizens, will be expected to fill in an online contact locator form, including onward travel information. Failure to do so will be punishable by a £100 fine. Responding to the announcement, SNP Shadow Home Secretary Joanna Cherry MP said, "As usual, the UK is behind the curve and out of step with international best practice. Other countries have had public health measures in place at their airports and ports for months, and indeed some are now in a position to ease these controls. In contrast, the UK has had no protections whatsoever, despite repeated calls from opposition politicians and public health experts." The UK government decided to end mass testing and contact tracing of those with or suspected of having COVID-19 in March, because a surge in new cases at that time was beyond the system's capacity, government advisers said today. Professors Yvonne Doyle and John Newton told the Health and Social Care Committee that the danger posed by the coronavirus had limited the number of laboratories able to handle the process, while other labs had been excluded because they were not able to offer an end-to-end clinical service. The UK has been left to play catch-up and firefight its way through the coronavirus pandemic due to a desperate lack of clear leadership, according to Paul Nurse, Nobel Prize-winning geneticist and head of the Francis Crick Institute in London. He said it was not clear to him who was in charge, and the country needed much more. "I get a sense the UK has been rather too much on the back foot, increasingly playing catch-up, firefighting through successive crises," he said. A Pakistan International Airlines Airbus jet with 99 people on board crashed into residential buildings in the Pakistani city of Karachi while approaching the airport earlier today. At least 3 passengers are said to have survived, but many others are feared dead. The airline has said that the pilot reported technical problems shortly before the incident, and witnesses say the plane had attempted to land more than once before apparently hitting a mobile tower and crashing. 250 health and care workers in Scotland will be recruited to take part in Phase 3 trials of a COVID-19 vaccine as part of a collaboration between Glasgow, Edinburgh and Oxford universities. Health Secretary Jeane Freeman said, "I'm delighted that the universities of Edinburgh and Glasgow, along with NHS colleagues, are taking part in the human safety trials for the development of a COVID-19 vaccine by Oxford University. The trials are expected to last for 12 months. Scottish Government funding of more than £8 million is helping projects to deliver mental health support and well-being services for people who are feeling isolated during the coronavirus pandemic. The funding was allocated to 344 projects who are providing support in communities across Scotland, including to those who are self-isolating or shielding. And musician Maury Kante, who helped win African music a global following, has died in the capital of his homeland, Guinea, at the age of 90, his agent said today. Kante's long-running career saw him progress from regional acclaim as a player of the traditional West African kora to international stardom in the 1980s with his chart-topping hit Yeke Yeke. And that is all the headlines for today. So, Tony, first of all, is there anything there that jumped out at you that you want to comment on?
Well, I mean, certainly the mental health funding is very welcome, in particular for those who will be shielding. And actually, the Scottish Government's route map that was published yesterday provides, I think, a lot of clarity and hope for a lot of people, probably the vast majority of us who have been in lockdown now for many weeks. But actually, for those who will be shielding for longer, it's for some will provide a sense of dread, knowing that for many more weeks they will have to continue shielding. So it's a case of how can we make sure that we do everything we can to protect those who will be shielding for much longer. And we know that social isolation, we know that loneliness is having a big impact on people's health right now. So that funding is welcome. How we use that funding, the next steps there will be crucial, and the role that the third sector will play in that will be absolutely fundamental to make sure that actually it's getting to the right people, and it's getting to people fast to make sure that really we are tackling loneliness and isolation as much as possible.
Sure. And Helena, anything there that you wanted to comment on?
It's pretty much the same as Tony. I mean, the funding, particularly for those shielding and self-isolating that are on their own, I have great concerns for those people, and I've loved ones that are experiencing that, and I'm starting to see the effects, and I really hope that it's something that's done rapidly to support those people.
Yeah. So now we want to get on, as I said at the top of the show, to talking about mental health issues. And clearly the coronavirus pandemic has led to a lot of people with especially anxiety, depression, those kind of problems as a result of the virus. So Helena, first of all, tell us a bit about what Southside Self-Isolation Support does. And then maybe a wee bit about the kinds of problems that people are having in your experience.
Sure. So the group was set up by Rona Sweeting, and there's a group of wonderful kind of people that orchestrated, Laura Kenny and Ross Ann Callan, among others, who are kind of strong pillars in the community and work in various roles. And obviously it was recognised early on that something needed to be done just on a smaller level within the community. And the South Side generally is very supportive of one another. It's a wonderful place to live, and obviously we've got things in place already that support. However, obviously this was a different ball game. The group itself, so it's there to, it starts as a Facebook group. It's still the Facebook group, we're in excess of 6,000 members now, which is incredible. And obviously people started to kind of request help for things, deliveries, prescriptions, and so on. So a structure was put in place by the core team, the administrators, as we kind of call them, and there was a kind of forms that were put out as requests to the public, asking for what skills they had in order to assist those within the community. And then that was divided up, and then volunteers were sought. And then we moved on to things, Street Champions, which worked on a kind of street by street basis, and it's a wonderful initiative which sees people in different postcodes we set up phone trees, WhatsApp groups, even posting contact details through people's doors. obviously adhering to safeguarding and social distancing and so on, in order to kind of build something that was more manageable on a smaller level. And it really kind of reduced the pressure on certain services. We were actually getting kind of communication from some of these sectors saying that, you know, the pressure on them was just incredible, and what we are and were doing was really aiding the support. So, as I say, I mean, we've been supporting members in the community by food deliveries, prescriptions, it's kind of now moved on to things like talking to people and supporting mental health. And also just providing things like tech help and signposting to mental health organisations. So it has been absolutely incredible. And just to answer your latter question in regards to what we're starting to see in the community and what we have seen, we've seen an expected rise in mental health issues, and it's particularly for what we've touched on with regards to shielding and self-isolating, which has been really a big concern. But also those that are really vulnerable, that might be terminally ill or do have underlying health problems that need help doing things. And also people that have never experienced mental health issues before, and this is coming from a place that they've never dealt with before, and trying to kind of almost signpost where they can find what they're experiencing.
Sure. So what would you say are the kind of major themes, I guess, that people are expressing concerns about?
So loneliness is probably one of the biggest ones. I think just general companionship and just being next to a human, which I think is obviously a natural thing for us all. And also there's just the fear of not having enough support and being scared to ask for that support. The other things are people being scared about how they're going to move on to the next phase. So it's the catastrophizing that comes in, and people thinking, right, I've dealt with this to a certain degree of being alone and self-isolating, but how am I going to deal with kind of moving on with the next phase and almost reintegrating with society? So it's been a really kind of just, I suppose, fascinating is might be not the best term to use, but just it's something that we've had to kind of really adapt to as we've moved along.
Sure. And Tony, obviously you're got a slightly different perspective. You're not doing the kind of ground level work that Helena is, or at least not professionally. I don't know what you're doing in your spare time. Are you hearing a similar picture from where you are? And also, what do you think the kind of causes are? Do you think it's predominantly the virus itself and kind of nervousness about getting ill and how you're going to cope with that, or do you think it's more the financial distress that's really putting a lot of pressure on people?
There's a wide range of issues. It's the not knowing, it's the unknown. This is all very new to everyone, and that in itself is a concern, and that in itself can lead to the what ifs that many of us are very familiar with. You know, what if this happens? What if that happens? And actually, one of the best things that we can do with what if scenarios is trying to take our mind back to the present moment. So our mind tends to wander off into all sorts of scenarios, and we have hundreds of thousands of thoughts a day. But trying to think of our minds as a bit of a light switch or a trigger that we can switch back to the present moment, and noticing the present moment around us, and thinking about the things that we're actually doing, whether it's washing the car, or whether it's washing the dishes, or whether it's taking the dog for a walk, actually focusing on the task at hand rather than letting our mind wander. And that is a good, useful technique to trying to take us back to the present moment and not thinking about those what ifs. Those what if scenarios are the main triggers that will then lead on to developing anxiety and sometimes panic as well. But so there's the uncertainty of the virus, and there's the uncertainty of what things will of how things will pan out. Secondly, there is the news intake. It's the amount of news that we're all consuming at the moment. Everything that we're reading is about COVID-19, and in just about any context. Just about any context you could possibly think of. So, allowing ourselves to switch off, allowing ourselves to maybe look at our apps and the way that we use our apps, limiting our news, and perhaps limiting our news to trusted sources. There's a lot of unreliable news that is going, particularly on social media, that's doing the rounds. Really trying to limit our news intake, I think, would help, particularly at this time as well. And thirdly, it's the socio-economic. For many people who perhaps are lucky enough to continue to work from home and have a salary, perhaps this is a great opportunity for them to be able to spend more time with their loved ones. Perhaps it's a great opportunity for them to rediscover an old hobby or spend more time speaking to friends over the phone. So actually, it's good for their mental health. But if you're someone who's lost their job, if you're perhaps worried about your business and you don't know if your business is going to be reopening in a few months, then that's a completely different situation. And your experience of lockdown, your experience of this pandemic will be completely different. And the impact that that's going to have on your mental health, it could be quite significant. And we know what happens in times of economic downturns. The likelihood of those negative thoughts of feeling trapped, thoughts of humiliation, thoughts of potential loss. These are serious thoughts that, in too many cases, unfortunately, can lead to suicidal thinking as well. So these are risks, and we need to try and mitigate and minimise those risks as much as possible, which is why we've been calling on both the Scottish and UK governments to do everything that they can to strengthen our social safety nets right now, to ensure that everybody, regardless of their financial position, every single one of us across this country has a bare minimum of a social safety net that we can rely on to get us through this crisis. And that involves housing policy, ensuring that no one's getting evicted at this time, perhaps looking at rent freezes and all sorts of policy ideas that we've put forward, because the socio-economic impact of this pandemic will be fundamental in preventing mental health problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually, because clearly this is, even if lockdown is lifted relatively soon, as we all hope it will be, there's going to be a kind of hangover from this. How big of a concern is that, and how much of an impact is that going to have once the NHS opens back, gets back up to running as normal? How big of an issue is it going to be for people who are trying to access that kind of support?
Well, we're conducting a longitudinal study with 4 universities about the impact of lockdown and the pandemic on mental health, looking at different themes. One of those themes was financial concerns, and we found that a third of Scottish adults in full-time work are concerned about losing their jobs, and 1 in 6 unemployed people have had suicidal thoughts and feelings as a result of the pandemic. And a third of Scottish adults have said that they're worried about their finances, such as paying the bills or perhaps debt. So we know that this is an issue, and lockdown is only, as you say, the initial part. It's the very beginning. The economic, the financial consequences of lockdown, particularly looking at specific industries, like if you look at aviation, if you look at hospitality, we know that this is going to have an impact on many industries in Scotland and globally, and therefore people's concerns on their livelihoods, on their ability to perhaps keep their mortgage, perhaps pay the rent, is going to have a significant impact on their mental health. So this is really the initial part, the initial phase. And as we move on, we need to continue to strengthen those safety nets. But actually, this is also an opportunity to reset a bit as well. To look at existing policies right across government and look at what works and what doesn't work. It's an opportunity, for example, to look at the economic safety nets, on a UK-wide basis as well, perhaps considering things like basic incomes, perhaps looking at how we can introduce more fairness in universal credit, particularly looking at that loan in the first 5 weeks that you have to pay back. Perhaps looking at child credit, and we've put forward a whole host of recommendations, financial recommendations to both governments, suggesting that actually there is more that we can do to strengthen those social safety nets.
Sure. And Helena, just before I come back to you, I should have said a wee bit earlier, you'll have seen on the screen appearing there. If you want to join this conversation on Twitter, you can do. You can follow us at Broadcast Scot, and you can use the hashtag Scotland@7. That's Scotland 80 number 7. If you want to join the conversation. And I see we've already got a tweet from our dear friend Chris McCusker, who I know is watching with interest because he's had his own mental health difficulties at times, and I know he's very interested in the subject. So Helena, coming back to you now, when you've been dealing with people, you've said that you're signposting to various services. What limits are there on the kind of support that's available just now? Are you finding that there's any difficulty in accessing support that when people need it?
Well, I mean, there's always, obviously we're not medical professionals,
sure,
and we
sure.
make that very clear in the kind of guidelines that we provide and so on. And signposting only goes so far. I think that when it comes to the organisations that we're signposting to, we do know people within those organisations, and we do hear that it is becoming, beyond the capacity of what they can deal with. What we've had to kind of maybe do a bit differently is recognise the frequency of some of our members posting, and also maybe kind of just be a bit more savvy as to their own cries for help and comfort and company. So we've been kind of proactively contacting people just to maybe offer and lend an ear, speak to them, and as I say, offer tech help, because a lot of people, what we have to remember is privilege is a wonderful thing. I'm very privileged in that I've got access to a lot of technology, but a number of people within our community have no access to tech. Some of them don't even have access to the internet. And so these are the types of things that we have to be completely aware of. So those people might not even be able to contact those services to seek help that we're signposting to. So that's where the street champions really come into effect, because we're on the ground. We either have got people that are within the same building as someone that can see that person is either struggling or doesn't have access. So I guess that going back to your original question, it's something that we've kind of just had to work around and adapt to.
Sure. Now, I noticed that you had written a blog quite recently talking about just some very basic things that people can do to maintain their own well-being. And obviously, this isn't medical advice. It's just kind of some good habits to get into and some good ways of thinking about things. Could you talk a wee bit about what some of those ideas that you have are?
Sure. So a lot of people will find that this is a kind of 5 steps thing that mental health foundations do and communities and organizations do kind of talk about. So connecting with people is one of the first things, and that is that social interaction, whether that be just over the internet that we're talking about. I do have to mention a wonderful initiative called the Tech Device Network that was set up by Jen Nimmo Smith that was set up sourcing technical devices for people in care homes and the vulnerable community so that they're actually able to connect with people. So there's initiatives like that that are happening, and connecting with people can be standing outside your neighbour's house, obviously adhering to social distancing, but talking to people and just making sure that you are doing that connection, but reconnecting with family members. If you haven't spoken to a family member, this is an ideal time to think, I might not speak to them, if I haven't spoken to them in some time, this might really make a change to their life. The next thing is being active. So being active is probably, from personal experience, this is one of the things that's helped me the most, and I know from an abundance of people, it's something that's helped others. Self-isolating is probably, it's the hardest thing. So it's simple things. At the end of the day, an achievement doesn't have to be you going on an online course. It can be making yourself a cup of tea or going for a shower. And that is something that we have to remember. So being active can be gardening, DIY, it can be arts and crafts, it can be anything at all. And I think things like having a routine and things like YouTube, I guess, are fantastic. And again, it brings that tech thing in, but it's obviously raising endorphins and just getting movement going. And if obviously you are able to go out for your exercise, then even just walking in the nature, in nature is a wonderful thing. So taking notice of your thoughts and feelings, and Tony's touched on this. It's being in the present. And it's the what ifs again, what Tony was saying. This is probably one of the most detrimental things to people's mental health. You are constantly thinking, what if this happens to me? What am I going to do? What if this happens to my family? Whereas you really have to try and bring yourself into the present. You can't do anything about the future to a certain extent, but you can do things about what you're doing now and monitoring what you're doing and just kind of maintaining your own health. Deep breathing exercises and just challenging those kind of negative thoughts that you're having. Learning, that's another point. So that can be things like just learning how to plumb your sink if it's blocked at the end of the day. It can be anything at all. It can be learning a new word and the meaning of it. There's so many simple things that this comes into. Obviously reading, baking, cooking, and so on. And then giving and kindness, and this is what this week has obviously been centered around. So volunteering, if you contact your local food bank. Our food banks are struggling so much now. They have been inundated, and obviously they've increased the pressure because people really are struggling financially and have found themselves in new situations. So it might be as simple as putting a kind of box in your close to collect items for your food bank and delivering that. It might be giving blood, which we can still do. It might be just phoning someone just to say, do you know, are you okay? Or, contacting your neighbour. So those are the kind of 5 steps that we've talked about on our blog we find that, and again, from personal experience, these are things that have really pushed my mental health to a manageable state.
Mm-hmm. And Tony, coming back to you now, when you look at these things, I saw one tweet a wee while ago that said something like, if you come out of this lockdown without having learned, some new skill or having achieved, having written the great American novel or whatever it was, then you had failed somehow. Now, obviously, some of us do have a bit of extra time and a bit of, extra maybe space to start learning something like that. But there is that concern, isn't there, that people feel like they're a failure because they see so much of social media, people going, well, I baked this and I wrote this and I, created this, I wrote this song or whatever. And, you feel like, well, I got out of bed today and that's about it,
Yeah. Well, you know what, for some people, getting out of bed on some days is, is an achievement, and I think most of us are taking this one step at a time and one day at a time. And you're absolutely right. We're all on a different journey here. We're all on our own different paths, and comparing ourselves to others, actually in a negative way, because it's not always done negatively, but very often comparisons with others is done in such a way that actually lowers our self-esteem, and affects our self-esteem and our mood. And sometimes we don't realise that. It's subconscious, and we don't realise that our self-esteem is taking a hit. But really, it's about finding out what works for us, what's important to us in our lives. This thing about failure, this notion of success and failure, our young people are really struggling because, and let alone well before COVID-19 was in the frame, failure is a big deal that is impacting our children's mental health, because they are comparing ourselves to their peers very often on social media like Instagram, perhaps comparing their bodies, and body image is a huge issue as well. And actually, this idea that they have to succeed in life, they have to get the exact, the best exam results, they have to have the perfect body, they have to have the right relationship, they have to have the right job by the age of 21, or be in a positive destination, so-called positive destination. We need to really, rein this in a bit, and remind ourselves that there is no such thing as successes and failures that are sort of decided by anybody else. We decide what our own achievements, or ambitions rather, our resolutions or ambitions, the things that we want to achieve in life. We decide those for ourselves, not anybody else, not our family, not our friends. And I'm guilty of that, to be quite honest with you. And I'm guilty of perhaps comparing myself with other people that I see on Instagram and all sorts of other social media apps, and I think we all do it from time to time. But it does have an impact on our self-esteem, and children, young people are particularly affected by it. So we need to shift this narrative on success, what is success and what is failure. We need to shift the narrative entirely as a whole, out with the context of COVID-19. But in the context of COVID-19, I would say, whatever helps to improve your mental health, whether it's baking, whether it's cooking, whether it's getting out and about, whether it's trying out something new, that'll be important. But let's not compare ourselves to others too much. Let's perhaps try to take notice of the times that we are comparing ourselves to other people, and what it's doing to us, what it's doing to our feelings, what it's doing to our, what thoughts are going through our minds when we're comparing ourselves negatively.
Now, you mentioned, for example, young people having that pressure to get the good results in their exams, and of course, this year, a lot of all young people are being left without exams to even do. And then, we've got older people who we've been saying for years that there's this crisis of loneliness amongst older people. To what extent do you think the pandemic is kind of just showing up existing problems that exist in society that are affecting our mental health for those kind of different groups? And do you think there is going to be space after lockdown ends and as we start to rebuild for us actually to change the way we organize society so that some of these issues are lessened?
Yeah, the pandemic is bringing our inequalities to the fore, and that's the key word here. It's fundamental structural inequalities in this country that have existed for years, and that this pandemic is exposing, and they're coming to the fore. And if you look at the data around who's dying from this virus, who's dying, who's been affected by COVID-19 the most, it is people in our poorest communities. So we know that people in our poorest communities are most likely to be affected by comorbidities, for example, so health inequalities. Um, so, that is clear. So our inequalities, structural inequalities, are being brought to the fore. And as I said earlier, this is an opportunity for us to redesign, to reframe, to do things differently, to figure out what works and what doesn't, and really to address those inequalities head on. So look at our welfare system. What is it about our welfare system that is leaving people behind? Why is it that we have sanctions that are exacerbating mental health problems like anxiety and depression? Why do we have a system whereby people are having to wait 5 weeks to receive their first payment when we know that they're already struggling to make ends meet and resorting to food banks? So we know that there are policies that are not working. We know that there are policies that are already exacerbating mental health problems, like sanctions, like the bureaucratic processes that people have to go through to get the help that they need. And really reshape our economy. New Zealand's been talking about a wellbeing budget. Well, actually, It's not been talking about it, implemented its first wellbeing budget. And actually, it's an opportunity for the UK government to look at what's happening in New Zealand here and think, how can we ensure that GDP, because GDP only tells us part of the picture. GDP tells us some important, they're important metrics, but they don't give us the full picture. They don't tell us about homelessness. They don't tell us about child poverty. They don't tell us about mental health. So we need to complement GDP with well-being metrics that can give us a fuller picture about societies. Otherwise, we'll only know about how the banks are getting on and how well big businesses and the economy is doing. But actually, the things that really matter to us, the things that we really value, like ensuring that we have a roof over our heads, like ensuring that people are well enough to be able to go out and work. This is all connected. Our health and our economy, our health and our ability to be in work, our health and the size of our welfare system. These are all things that are connected. So why don't we have well-being metrics that are complementing GDP? And of course, Scotland has its performance frameworks, which is very very valuable. But I think the UK government as a whole that has all those economic levers should be looking at that. This is an opportunity. This pandemic is an opportunity really to do things differently and to address those structural inequalities.
Yeah. And Helena, coming back to you, when you're working, as I said, at the kind of ground level, you're in contact with people who are experiencing these individual problems. And that kind of community building effort that you've done with these street champions, is that something that you think could continue after the pandemic's over, where you just have an organization that helps people look after each other better?
Most definitely. I think that obviously, we're talking about kindness and so on, but it's I spoke to my neighbour that I weirdly we know of each other through the music industry, but we've never spoken to each other until we've been in this situation. And she was telling me that her whole building, there's people that they've lived together for 10 years, but they've not spoken to each other. And it's built that relationship, and they've become such excellent friends and comrades during this. And that's the common theme through this. So I think that going forward, and I touched on this earlier, is kind of easing pressure on the services that people are kind of going to. If we can just build from the grassroots up that initial kindness and help and love to one another, and a lot of people might think that's very cheesy, but it definitely isn't. It's just that kind of human, fundamental human kindness and help that you're offering to one another, then that in itself, it makes a remarkable difference when it comes to your mental health. And I think it makes you less scared about talking about the issues or approaching someone for help. So if we can continue that going forward, then goodness knows what we could do to reduce the issues that are happening within our community.
Sure. Now, when we talk about this, we've talked a bit about how we can look after ourselves, but I'm thinking about how we can help other people as well, because clearly some people will be experiencing problems that maybe they're not able to manage themselves. They're maybe not in a position where they feel able to ask for help. So, Tony, maybe come to you first on this. How can we look out for people who do need help? I mean, what warning signs should we maybe be looking for from friends and family while we're not maybe physically in contact with them, but how can we keep an eye on people, and what should we be looking for to kind of, what warning flags are there out there?
Well, there are many warning flags. I mean, one of them would be withdrawal. So people who tend to withdraw, people who are less likely to connect with others, who are likely to not take the opportunity to speak to family members or friends, and perhaps really isolate themselves and choose to do so. I think that is one of the main warning signs. And really, what we can do is encourage people to let them know, first of all, that we're present, that we're available, to reach out and say, "I'm here," and sometimes that's all that you need to do. Not urging people to do specific things. And actually, the public health advice that is out there is very good. With regards to exercise, with regards to healthy eating, with regards to keeping a routine, with regards to good sleep. But actually, some of these issues are some of the things like sleeping and routine, and eating well. If you're going through a particularly difficult time, particularly with low mood, then these are some of the first things that go. These are some of the first things that you stop doing. So you stop eating well, you stop exercising, you stop connecting, and we need to kind of look out for those. So these are whole population advice that on the whole is evidence based, and it works, right? It works. But for people with more serious mental health problems, perhaps more moderate to more serious mental health problems, that advice can, on some occasions, I won't say be counterproductive, but can sometimes be just not be enough, and people in some situations when they are withdrawing are looking, just simply want to know that there is someone there that is willing to listen in a non-judgmental fashion, with not urging people to do X, Y, and Z, but simply saying, "I'm here, and I'm here to listen." With whatever issues or worries or fears that you may have, I'm here to listen. And sometimes that's enough. If people want the public health advice around, eating well and exercise and all the rest of it, that's out there, and we should promote it. But we should also be aware that there are some people where that advice it may not be what they want to hear at a specific time, and what they might want to hear is simply, "I'm here. I'm here to listen." And listening is a skill that is very important in approaching people who are going through a difficult time. And that's also why organisations like Breathing Space and Samaritans are people's first choice on some occasions, because people would prefer to speak to trusted strangers. Anonymous calls whereby you let it all out, and you tell people exactly how you're feeling, without being judged. So those organisations are very important, and that's why I'm signposting this evening as well to both Samaritans and Breathing Space, who we work very closely with, and they're fantastic organisations. But going back to your original point, again, ensuring that we reach out, we let people know that we are there, I think sometimes is really the best thing that we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And to you, Helena, kind of a similar question. What do you think we can what do you what I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Sorry. What are you doing when it comes to people who are perhaps already experiencing mental health problems? Maybe, we know that lots of people have depression, anxiety, other mental health problems long before the pandemic came along, and now they're in this position where they're maybe some of those problems are maybe exacerbated. Are you finding that's a common problem, and how are you able to help with those?
So it's a very strange situation. We've had people that have had this, been coping with this for a long time, that weirdly have within this situation become strangely calm, because the fight or flight within them for such a long time has now finally got a purpose, and they feel that they are within something that they've been working towards. So there's that side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, you have the people that have become progressively worse. So it is, again, I think what Tony's touched on, you have to make yourself available. So you don't be forceful. You're not trying to force these things on people. Pride is a blessing and a curse. And unfortunately, a lot of us, well, certainly for me, speaking from personal experience, my pride gets in the way quite a lot. And I think there's a fear of asking for help. You don't want to bother people. And I think that's one of the key things that's a real detrimental aspect to mental health. It's you think that people don't understand, but at the same time, you just don't want to bother them with what you feel is a problem. So being available, not forcing your kind of presence or not forcing someone to do something, but being informed. So having all these kind of tips and signposting abilities, so that if someone does eventually come to you, that you can say, I think maybe this would help. And I think it's about people finding what is best for them. I think a lot of people think that, if this is the first thing I go to, then this has to work for me, when that just is a myth. CBT might not work for you, and you might need long-term talking therapy. I mean, these are the things that you as a character and as a person need to kind of discover for yourself. And I guess that it's, for people that are actually in this situation, that are close to people that with experiencing mental health, is don't avoid them. And you find that sometimes it often happens with grief. Someone like a friend's relative dies, then you just think, I just don't know how to approach this. Whereas it's, you just need to kind of keep as much of what we, normality, I'm going to say that in inverted commas. So you want to just keep that relationship going. And I think if you keep as much of that going as possible and that lifeline to someone, then that in itself can really help them.
Mm-hmm. And this theme for Mental Health Awareness Week of kindness matters. You talked a little bit earlier about some of the ways people can be kinder to each other. What would you say to the idea of kind of people being more kind to themselves?
For me?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the hardest things to do when you are struggling with your mental health. I think there's Tony mentioned earlier about failure, and whenever you feel that what you deem as failure within your life, you kind of hold it against yourself for quite a long time to come, and it does often, sometimes it never disappears. So it's kind of dealing with those things. And I think that you just have to remember that you're deserving of your place in this world, and you might not feel that that you're making a difference, but your butterfly effect on this earth is unbelievable, and you will have made a difference to so many people's lives. So that kindness in itself to yourself, of being accepting and just wanting to experience this world and how amazing it is, and the wonderful things that we have creatively, and just, experiencing, love and human emotion with one another, are things that obviously it's that cliche of money can't buy. So it's breaking things down to a really simplistic level and just understanding that is one of the reasons that you're here.
Sure. And Tony, we spoke very briefly before the show started about kindness as a way of guiding policy as well. Could you talk a wee bit about that side of what your work and what you're kind of proposing?
Yeah, so the Mental Health Foundation has been running Mental Health Awareness Week for the past 20 years now, and we changed the theme to kindness very much last minute in response to the pandemic. It was supposed to be sleep, but as I say, because of the situation, we decided that it was the right fit and the right theme for this time. And really, we responded to the many spontaneous acts of kindness that we've seen across Scotland, across the UK, and getting across very important messages about the impact that kindness can have on our own mental health, kindness to ourselves, self-compassion, but also kindness to one another. The impact that volunteering, for example, has on our mental health. The concept of doing good does you good, and this is absolutely important on an individual level and a societal level, at a community level. And we know that communities really are doing a hell of a lot right now to respond to a lot of vulnerable groups in society. But actually, really to have a whole society approach, we need policy to take a kindness lens as well. And that's why we've called for a kindness test to be applied right across government departments, in creating new policy and in reviewing existing policy, because, as I said earlier, all policy across government right now needs to be reviewed to determine whether it's fit for purpose in response to the pandemic and post-pandemic, as we ease lockdown. So really, we want to ensure that our policies are fit for purpose and that are built upon values of dignity, respect, human rights, and kindness. So, for example, I talked a lot about welfare and the economy earlier, so perhaps I'll give another example around justice. Our justice system that is still very punitive in nature. As much as we like to think ourselves as a progressive country, there's a lot of research showing that in Scotland we have quite a harsh view on what should happen to people who break the law. The evidence base and the public health analysis is that actually a more recovery-based approach is more effective in justice. And even if you look at Scotland's high drug death rate, taking a public health approach rather than an ideological approach would, according to some of the research out there, be a lot more effective. So instead of stigmatizing people on drugs, and perhaps treating them as criminals, we could be taking more of a public health approach to address some of those inequalities. Why is it that people are resorting to drugs? Well, in many cases, it's a desperate cry for help from people in some of our most poorest communities, and that is at the root of Scotland's drug problem. And therefore, taking a kindness approach to our justice system would revolutionise the way that we deal with people who are resorting to drugs, and perhaps taking more of a recovery based approach to our justice system. So that's one example of how kindness and dignity and human rights can be applied there. And I could go on and on right across different government departments.
Yeah, I'm reminded of something that Darren McGarvey once said, that instead of letters with red ink saying pay up or else, how much better it would be, how much more productive it would be if you got a letter saying, it seems like you might be having some problems, how can we help? And that, I think, is the kind of thing that it seems like you're...
Absolutely, and that's why we've also called for, you're talking about those letters, we've called for a complete halt to debt collections, during this time, because absolutely unacceptable that when people are struggling to pay the bills, that that they should be hounded by debt collectors at this time. And actually, I've seen in the media that it's, in some cases, it's still ongoing, which is absolutely shocking. So all sorts of policy recommendations there that that have kindness at their core to build a better society, a fairer and more equal society.
Yeah. Now, just before we go, we are almost out of time. Helena, I mentioned earlier that your mental health resources page is one of the best I've seen. It's very comprehensive. So could you tell people just where they can find your website and oh, we have brought it up on the screen already. Brilliant. So it's way ahead of you. Southsidesis.co.uk. As I say, that mental health resources page is excellent. And as well, speaking on a personal note, we've talked about the Samaritans here. We've talked about some other services that are available. Speaking from personal experience, I can tell you the Samaritans very probably saved my life at one point. I know some people have difficulties with the way that the Samaritans treat you when you call, but they are very, very good at just listening and without judgment. It's an excellent place if you just need to get something off your chest. Samaritans is excellent. Breathing Space provides quite a similar service. But there are all these other services that provide signposting as well as practical help. And I can only recommend that you if you are feeling that you can't cope for whatever reason, that you do reach out and try to ask for some kind of help, because there are people who want to help, people who can help. And as we've also said tonight, people will tell you that you've not made a difference. That people will you might feel like you don't matter, that you're not important, that you're taking up resources that somebody else needs more. But believe me, you are important, and that's something that's very, very that's crucial to remember. It's the illness that's telling you you're not important. That's not reality.
Absolutely. Kenny, can I also flag our hub? It's mentalhealth.org.uk/coronavirus, and that is our hub, which gives all sorts of mental health advice and tips there, but also on things like financial concerns, domestic abuse, a whole host of different forms of advice there as well. So that's mentalhealth.org.uk/coronavirus. mentalhealth.org.uk/coronavirus. Yeah, that's I'm sure an excellent resource as well. I didn't get a chance to look at that one before the show though, so I can't give a personal recommendation. I won't take it personally.
I'm sure it's excellent. But that is just about all we've got time for tonight. So I really want to thank Tony Giuliano and Helena Rifai. You've both been excellent talking about this. It is something that we can and we should continue to talk about. That's maybe a conversation that can carry on through social media, carry on in our private conversations. It is very important to talk about how we're feeling, and if we're going to build some sort of better society after this pandemic, then I think taking care of each other, being kinder to each other, is going to be a key part of that. Now, before we go, we just have to ask, if you want to donate or you want to volunteer, then Broadcasting Scotland is here to help. You can donate by going to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up as a supporter there. Your £5 a month will make a huge difference to what we're able to do here. You can also help. You can be very kind to Broadcasting Scotland by following us at Broadcast Scot, or on Facebook.com/broadcast Scot. You can follow us there. Share the the shows around. We did talk earlier about reducing your news consumption, but an hour a day with Broadcasting Scotland, I'm sure, is fine. And as well, if you want to get involved here, again, speaking for myself, being involved here has been really good for my well-being, my mental health, for the last however long it's been that I've been involved here. So there are jobs here. You can get a bit of experience, potentially even get out of the house as things start to as lockdown restrictions start to loosen up. There's always work to be done here of all sorts. So if that's something you want to get involved with, then please let us know. But that is all we've got time for tonight. Once again, I'd like to thank Helena and Tony for joining us. Two really, really interesting guests with a lot.
Thanks for having me.
A lot of fascinating stuff to say. And I'll be back on Sunday with the Full Scottish as usual at 12. Gordon will be back on Sunday on Monday rather with another Scotland at 7. But until then, I've been Kenny McBride. Have a great evening and a great weekend, and please take care of yourselves.